Hello. In the 1970s, on one of London's most famous streets, a young man in his 20s, while sitting in his home, managed to accidentally eavesdrop on one of the strangest robberies in the history of England. More than £1.5 million sterling, jewels, and papers belonging to important people in the country were stolen from one of London's largest banks, in a manner reminiscent of a Sherlock Holmes novel. This happened in the presence of the police, and without anyone realizing a crime was taking place. In fact, even after some of the criminals who participated in the crime were arrested, no one was able to identify all the participants, nor the total value of the stolen items, which is said to have included things whose value exceeded that of the British Crown jewels. What's even stranger is that some of the recovered papers were placed in the British archives, and the police said that they would not reveal anything about them until the year 2071. Welcome, and today I'm going to tell you about the Baker Street Bank Robbery. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell to be notified of our new story every week. Let's see your support. The events of our story take place in September 1971. During this period, London was going through a very difficult time. The economy was in a terrible state, unemployment was high, and crime was everywhere. At this time, Anthony Gavin, a young man in his late 20s with a criminal record for breaking and entering, was out of a job. One day, while he was sitting in his garden and work was slow, he decided to entertain himself with one of the detective novels he loved and always read. On this day, it was the turn of the novel The Red-Headed League, the famous story by the English writer Arthur Conan Doyle, part of the famous series of adventures of the detective Sherlock Holmes. As soon as Anthony read the story, it got stuck in his head, and he decided he had to apply it in real life. The Red-Headed League tells the story of a criminal gang who rents a shop next to a bank, and under the pretext of working on a project, they spend their days digging a tunnel from the shop's basement to the bank's vault. Anthony was so taken with the idea that he decided to do the same. But to be able to do this, he needed to succeed in meeting all the conditions. The first of which was choosing the team that would help him carry out the operation. A key condition for them was that they all had to have clean records with the police and no prior convictions, so that when the bank officials discovered the crime and reported it to the police, their names wouldn't already be on file. The second condition was the bank itself. The bank to be robbed had to be one of those with a section dedicated to safe deposit boxes. This is because the things that are placed in these vaults, the bank usually doesn't know what's inside, and thus tracking them would be much more difficult. Not only that, but the location of the bank also had to be in a busy commercial area with many shops around it, so that no one would notice any strange activity happening in the area. And it also had to have an empty shop next to it, offered for sale or rent, for Anthony to use as a headquarters for himself and his team. Anthony was not just some random person who woke up one day and decided to rob a bank. He was very intelligent. His service in the British Army had given him experience in planning, organization, and attention to detail. For this reason, his choice of team members was not random. He spent 2 full months searching for them in his circle of acquaintances in bars and nightclubs, until one day he remembered an old friend of his named Reginald Tucker, a 37-year-old used car dealer who, from time to time, worked with stolen car parts. Meaning, although he appeared clean on the surface, there was a part of him that wasn't so clean. This is what made Anthony think of him. One day, he went to his workshop to feel him out. As soon as they met, he started talking to him about life and the poverty they were in, until Tucker told him, "Man, if I could rob a bank, I wouldn't hesitate." This was exactly what Anthony wanted, served up to him on a silver platter. He told him, "I promise you, your dream will come true soon." He began to explain the plan that was in his mind. Because Tucker knew that Anthony was a cautious and not a reckless person, he was sure that he wouldn't offer him a deal like this unless he had studied everything well. For this reason, it didn't take Tucker long to think, and he agreed immediately. 2 days after this meeting, Tucker called Anthony and asked him, "When do we start?" He thought everything was ready and all that was left was the execution. But he was shocked when he learned from Anthony the specifications of the bank he was looking for. He told him, These are all impossible conditions. It's impossible to find a bank with all these conditions. But Anthony was determined that what was in his mind was what would happen. He made a list of all the streets with banks and began to filter them one by one. After 2 full months of searching, he finally settled on the required bank. This bank was Lloyds Bank, located at 187 Baker Street. Coincidentally, the same street where Sherlock Holmes lived in his novel. Baker Street was known as one of the most prestigious areas in London and was a bustling street most of the time. Lloyds Bank was not an ordinary bank. It was a repository for the jewelry, money, and secrets of the richest and most prominent people in London. And luckily for him, there was a leather goods shop right next to the bank that was for rent. Thus, the second condition was also met. Now, the problem they faced was how to get the money to rent the shop. The Lissac shop was only 12 meters away from the bank, which was a great opportunity for Anthony to use the shop for digging the tunnel. But the problem was that the shop owners were asking for £10,000 sterling, and Anthony, as we know, was broke. But he remembered that when he was talking with Tucker, he learned from him that he had some money set aside. He decided to ask him for it so they could rent the shop. Indeed, he went to him and began to convince him that it was a profitable deal by all measures, and what he would pay now would come back to him many times over after the operation. And if they didn't get this shop, it would surely be sold quickly because the area was prime and it was right next to a bank. At first, Tucker completely rejected the idea. He had no intention of risking what he had to rent a shop to carry out a robbery that he wasn't even sure would succeed. But after he thought about it for a while, he suggested to Anthony that they get the money from a third person, Benjamin Wolfe, a 64-year-old antiques dealer and an old friend of Tucker's. He made good money from his work and surely had the money and more. Since he and Tucker did some illegal business together, Tucker said he was surely the right person. At first, Anthony completely refused to bring a stranger into their midst, especially since Benjamin was old and his physical fitness wouldn't allow him to help them in an operation like this. In other words, he would be coming in with his money without doing anything. Besides, they didn't know him and couldn't guarantee whether he might betray them or not. But in the end, he was forced to agree because he had no other choice. When they presented the plan to Benjamin, he agreed to participate on the condition that he would take a percentage of the total stolen goods. He told them, "If anything happens and I feel the plan is failing, I will withdraw as if I never knew you." Indeed, the three of them agreed. Benjamin prepared the money and rented the shop in May 1971. After they took possession, the three of them went to study the place. Luckily for them, the shop had a basement that was used as a storage room. This way, they no longer had to worry about the risk of digging in the floor of the shop itself. All the digging would be done on the lower floor without a sound. To prevent the possibility of anyone entering the shop while they were busy digging, they hung a sign on the door saying that the shop would open at the end of September. They began to change the appearance of the shop from the outside to make it look to people that preparations were underway for the opening. They painted the windows white and put curtains behind them so that nothing happening inside would be visible. With that, all that was left for them was to prepare the digging equipment and to find out the details of the safe deposit vault in the bank, on the basis of which they would determine the distance and direction of the digging. Since Anthony and his team now officially had a shop and a business, they had the opportunity to open an account at the bank they were going to rob. This account would be the pretext for them to frequent the bank to study its layout. Tucker was the right man for this mission. He looked respectable, was eloquent, knew how to talk, and it was very difficult for anyone to suspect from his appearance that he was a con man. Indeed, a few days passed, and Tucker went to the bank and, under a pseudonym, opened an account with £500 sterling. From then on, he began to frequent the bank constantly, in his full elegance, and started to befriend the employees there to prove to them that he was a businessman and a respectable client. 2 months later, he submitted a request to rent a safe deposit box. This way, Tucker was able to reach the room they would die to enter from the beginning. Since the bank's privacy policy stipulated that the employee must leave the client alone in the room, Tucker seized the opportunity and began to study the room's details quickly, without anyone noticing. Over the following days, he visited the vault 13 times, Each time, he would take advantage of the employee leaving him alone and would keep measuring. Using a simple 66-centimeter umbrella, he was able to draw a detailed map of the place they were going to take over. During this period, Tucker was able to gather very precise information about the room, including that the room's door was fully armored and weighed 5 tons. The entire floor was reinforced concrete, and each tile measured 23 centimeters. Through the details he gathered, he was able to calculate the distance with great accuracy and to determine exactly where the tunnel should emerge, so that it would be far from the alarm sensors and would lead them to the safe deposit boxes, of which there were a total of 268. He also learned that the bank's vault was 1.5 meters deeper than the shop's basement from which they would start digging. With that, they had a complete map of the place, but there was still something missing for them to be able to start the execution. The equipment they would use to dig the tunnel, which had to be suitable for penetrating the concrete floor. The second thing was to choose an expert in alarm systems to help them bypass the bank's security systems and disable the sensors inside, which would be triggered as soon as they sensed any nearby vibration. And the last thing was that they were forced to resort to one more person to be responsible for monitoring the area from the outside while they were working. After the team was sure that the matter would require heavy equipment, they were forced to add a new member to the team. Thomas Stevens, also a 33-year-old used car dealer with experience in smuggling heavy equipment and weapons. After learning the details of the operation and deciding to join them, he brought them a 100-ton hydraulic jack, which with its power would be able to penetrate the bank's floor. He also brought them a thermal lance that could generate heat up to 4,500 degrees Celsius, with which they would cut the concrete's rebar with ease. And with all this, he also brought them gelignite explosives, so that if the hydraulic jack didn't produce the desired result, they would use the thermal lance, and if that also didn't work, they would resort to the explosives. All of this, of course, was in addition to other small tools needed for digging. After the team reached this point, it was time to find the security systems expert who would help them bypass the alarm devices. After a period of searching, they finally settled on Mickey Gervais, also known as Skinny. They also agreed with Bobby Mills to be the one responsible for monitoring the shop and the bank from the roof of the building opposite them and to relay the news to them constantly via walkie-talkie. With that, all the elements were ready for them to begin executing the operation. They chose the first Saturday of August to be the day they would start digging, because it would be the night before Sunday, which is a holiday there, and the poultry shop between them and the bank, which they were supposed to pass under, would also be closed. Consequently, there would be no one to sense the banging and hammering that would occur with the digging. Indeed, they waited for Saturday night, after all the shops had closed, and began with the opening they would go down from until they reached the shop's foundations. Every time they dug a section, they would put steel supports on the sides of the tunnel to protect it from collapsing. And as the tunnel got a little longer, they would install lights to illuminate the place for them as they dug. The plan was that they would keep digging all day, Sunday until dawn on Monday, just an hour before the shops returned to work. Then they would take a break and return to dig the following Saturday after everyone had closed, and so on, until they reached the bank's floor. The excavation waste they were taking out, they were dumping in an abandoned garden behind the shop where they were digging. Once, while they were digging, Bobby called them on the walkie-talkie and told them that 2 young men were walking in the street and had suddenly stopped in front of the shop and began to look through the window and put their ears to the glass as if they were trying to hear something. They quickly stopped digging. Bobby came down from the roof, went to them, and told them that he was working as a guard there. He asked them why they were standing in front of the shop. Their response was that they had heard noises coming from inside and were afraid that someone was trying to rob the shop or something. He told them, "No, don't worry. The shop owner likes to leave the radio on when he goes home. And anyway, I'm here to watch the place closely." After this incident, Anthony began to fear that the operation would fail and they would all be exposed because of the noise. And for the 3rd time, luck was on his side. At the time when he was trying to find a solution to muffle the sounds of digging, the government coincidentally began excavation and repair work in their area. This meant that they were no longer forced to dig only on holidays. Now they could dig in broad daylight with the streets full of people, without anyone noticing that the sound was coming from the shop and not from the municipal work being done in the street. Although the problem of the sound was now solved, the digging itself was very tiring. The place was narrow, hot, there was no air, and the oxygen was barely enough for them. Not to mention, of course, the constant going up and down to remove the waste. Anthony, during this period, lost 15 full kilograms. Tucker had to leave them every so often to attend to his normal business and go to the bank as usual to check that no one suspected anything. They continued like this for about a month, from August 1st to early September. Until one time, while they were digging, they hit the reinforced concrete of the safe deposit vault. With that, they had reached the serious stage. They were supposed to penetrate the floor without the alarm system sensing it. Here luck played with them for the fourth time. Tucker, while he was there, overheard some talk that the bank had turned off the alarm sensors until the government finished the work in the street because the devices were constantly going off with any vibration that occurred in the ground. With that, they had a golden opportunity to use the hydraulic jack without having to worry about the security system. Indeed, they placed the supports and began to press on the bank's floor, hoping they could break through it. But as they were working, the tunnel was about to collapse on them and everything was going to be ruined. At that point, they decided to take a break and think of an organized solution so that all their past efforts would not be in vain. Anthony went out to have a drink at one of the pubs he used to go to. On that night, he kept drinking until he got very drunk and let his tongue slip, telling the details of the operation to someone who was sitting next to him without realizing it. The next morning, when he woke up and realized what he had done, he panicked. He gathered the team and told them that the plan had been exposed. They had to speed up the work before the police found out. They were lucky for the fifth time. The person Anthony had spoken to was a friend of Thomas's, and he was an expert in explosives. As soon as he heard the story, he went to Thomas and offered his help. Consequently, they now had a specialist in the use of the explosives they had, instead of using them randomly. In the beginning, he placed simple explosives around the area where the opening they would come out of would be. He began to detonate them gradually until they reached a stage where they could then continue digging using the thermal lance. Indeed, they were able to open a hole in the room's floor with a diameter of 30 centimeters. Although the hole was small, the effort they had put in had made most of them thin enough to be able to pass through it. One by one, they began to slip into the bank's vault, opening the safes and filling everything in them into a small sack. And with that, the entire plan was successfully completed. Then, on the same night, while the men were working on the operation, just 800 meters away from the bank, specifically on Wimpole Street, a young man named Robert Rowlands was at home, trying to listen to Radio Luxembourg, but not the ordinary radio that people use. Robert was a hobbyist who liked to play with radio waves to eavesdrop on the police's wireless devices and find out about the crimes happening in the area, take the details, and leak them to a journalist friend of his, taking money from him in return. But as he was scanning through the frequencies, he suddenly heard a strange conversation. Two voices talking on a walkie-talkie. One was inside a place, and the other was clearly outside, monitoring the place. He heard them talking about 400,000 pounds sterling and that they were almost finished and would be leaving soon. Robert immediately deduced that what was happening was a robbery. Although he knew that if the police got wind that he was spying on them, they would imprison him, his conscience was awakened, and he felt he had to take a step. He decided to call the police station and tell them that a robbery was happening in the area right now. When they asked him where exactly, he didn't know what to say. They asked him, "How did you know this information?" He told them, "I heard it on the radio." The officer started to laugh, thought he was drunk, and told him, "If you hear anything else, record it." Although the officer was being sarcastic, Robert took the officer's advice, got a small cassette recorder, and began to record the conversations he was hearing. For 2 hours, he recorded a complete conversation that was going on between the gang members. He also heard the voice of a woman talking, and one man complaining about the smoke and poisonous gases that were spreading in the place because of the equipment. He also heard a fight between the man on the roof and the man inside, which ended with the man on the roof getting rid of the walkie-talkie he had and withdrawing from the mission. At 1 in the morning, Robert decided to call the headquarters of the Metropolitan Police. This time, the police took the report very seriously and sent him an officer to listen to the recordings he had made. They realized that it was indeed a robbery, and a major bank robbery at that. But the problem was that the police couldn't pinpoint the exact location of the signal. In the 1970s, the technology for tracking wireless signals was very primitive. Buildings could easily interfere with them, and it was very difficult to determine their source. But at that time, Robert told them that the robbery must be within a 1 or 2 mile radius of his location, because the walkie-talkie signals don't reach a distance further than that. But for some unknown reason, the police decided to search in a circle with a radius of 13 kilometers. This was a big mistake that wasted a lot of their time. The area the police had drawn contained 750 full banks. Since most of them were closed due to the weekend holiday, the police were forced to contact the bank managers and security guards to have the banks opened. All of this, while the gang was sitting inside the vault of Lloyds Bank less than a kilometer away from Robert's location. And the strange irony is that the police actually went to Lloyds Bank and asked the manager to let them search it. But when they found the situation stable and reached the safe deposit vault and found it locked and the doors intact, they took their leave. This was despite the fact that they knew from the recordings that the criminals were robbing through a tunnel. Yet, no one thought of entering the room to make sure that nothing was happening. Of course, what had happened made the gang know that the police had started to search for them. They took what they had taken and left the bank. But when they found that the police were still searching the next day and still randomly, they returned the next morning at 8:30 a.m. to complete their mission and finish off all the vaults. They took very expensive jewelry and watches and a lot of money, exceeding £1.5 million sterling. Some of the vaults contained papers, pictures, and scandals of very important people in the country, and they took those as well. At the end of the day, they left the tunnel and hid any trace of them that was in the place. They only left the heavy equipment and the walkie-talkie to distract the police while they were searching. They escaped from the back window of the shop and locked it with a new lock. So if anyone saw it, they would think it was just locked. There was a car waiting for them in the back street. They put all the stolen goods in it and fled the area. On the morning of September 13th, the bank manager arrived at work as usual, like any other day. There was nothing strange to indicate that the bank had been robbed. At 10 a.m., the time for opening the safe deposit room for the daily inspection arrived. But of course, as soon as he saw the scene, he almost died. 268 vaults were broken and completely empty. The floor was full of scattered papers and jewelry, and a large hole in the ground led to a tunnel. Next to it was a message that said, "Let's see how Sherlock Holmes solves this one." The manager immediately called the police. In a few minutes, the bank was closed, and the inspection operations began. They contacted the owners of the vaults to find out the details of the stolen items. But not all the people agreed to say what was in their vaults, and 8 of them refused to give the police any information at all. Anyway, when the investigators followed the tunnel, they reached the Lissac shop next to the bank. There, they didn't find any clues about the criminals, but they found 8 tons of dirt and rocks dumped in the back garden. Of course, they had to examine the 8 tons with great care, but there was still no evidence. The news spread everywhere in London, and the press was all over the story. A large reward was offered for anyone who could lead the police to the criminals. In the first week after the discovery of the robbery, the Metropolitan Police assigned 120 investigators to the case. They were divided into 4 teams: a team to examine the crime scene, a team to communicate with the owners of the vaults, a team in the control center, and a team for external investigations. They got Robert's recordings and began to study them carefully. From the recording, they were able to determine that at least 6 individuals had participated in this robbery, including 1 woman. But who? No one knew. After searching and investigating with many people, the first lead in solving the case came from the lease of the Lissac shop. The critical and foolish mistake that the gang members had overlooked was that when Benjamin Wolfe rented the shop, he had signed the contract with his real name. For this reason, the police found him quickly and began to monitor him and track all his movements and communications. They learned that he had a connection with a young man named Tucker, whose workshop had been closed for a while and he was missing. Accordingly, they put Tucker under surveillance as well. In late October 1971, they saw Tucker handing a bag to 2 foreigners, Abdullah Hassan Gangji and his nephew, Akbar Mohammed Ali Gangji. When the police arrested them, They found 32,000 pounds of the stolen money with them. Shortly after, they arrested Wolf and Tucker, who confessed about Anthony and Thomas, and they were arrested as well. They were able to recover from them papers, documents, and belongings that had been stolen, in addition to 231,000 pounds sterling of the stolen money. As for the rest of the money, they completely refused to confess its location or its value. The strangest thing that happened in the matter was that the four of them, as they were being arrested, offered no resistance to the police, as if they had been waiting to be caught. Although Wolf and Tucker confessed about Anthony and Thomas, they completely refused to confess the names of any other individuals who had participated with them, except for Bobby Mills, the one responsible for the surveillance, who had argued with them and withdrawn in the middle of the operation. This made the investigators suspect that the accused who had been caught were part of a giant organization and were refusing to talk. For this reason, the insurance companies offered a reward of 30,000 pounds sterling for anyone who provided information leading to the arrest of the rest of the gang members. On January 2, 1973, the trial of the four accused began, along with the Gangsters brothers. The trial lasted for 19 days and was one of the most famous trials in British history. It ended with Anthony, Tucker, and Thomas being sentenced to 12 years in prison and Wolf to 8 years in prison. As for the Gangsters brothers, they were acquitted after it became clear that they were working for a financial company in Switzerland and knew nothing about the robbery. But what was strange was that the court did not ask about the rest of the stolen goods, nor did it even try to find out who the other members of the gang were, as if some powerful figure was behind closing the matter. When the owners of the vaults filed a lawsuit against the bank and demanded compensation of 500,000 pounds sterling, the case was brought before the High Court in '77. After only 4 days, a D notice was issued, which is a formal request to the media not to publish or broadcast certain information for reasons of national security. This confirmed to many that what was in the vaults was not just money and jewelry. Rumors spread that one of the vaults contained pictures of Princess Margaret, Queen Elizabeth's sister, with an actor named John Bindon, who was known for his connections with London gangs. These pictures were used to blackmail the royal family. Another rumor emerged saying that British intelligence was the one who had arranged the robbery to retrieve the pictures of the princess. But what is certain is that no one knows the full truth behind the robbery of Lloyds Bank on Baker Street. Was it just an ordinary bank robbery or an intelligence operation? Or was the whole thing just corruption by members of the police? Unfortunately, the 100% true answer will remain a secret until the year 2071. And with that, we reach the end of the story. I'm waiting for your opinions, and if you have a story you want us to tell, write it in the comments. The idea that gets the most interaction, I will work on, God willing. Show me your support now with a subscription, a like, a comment, and all that good stuff. Share the video with anyone you think will like it. I'll see you next time with a story more thrilling than the last. Peace.